Alright guys, so we must do an urgent update on the financial war because things are getting out of hand. The BRICS bloc is rising. These are the fastest growing economies and they are beginning to flip the world order. During the BRICS summit, we saw 13 new countries join as partners. And this included Asian heavyweights like Thailand and Indonesia. The West, they understand the level of threat a BRICS expansion poses, especially to their hegemony of the financial system. If the US dollar falls, so do the Western economies of the world. And now the West, they are striking back. The empire strikes back. The Bank of International Settlements is plotting to end the mBridge project because of Vladimir Putin. mBridge is a payment system independent of Western banks and SWIFT. It's powered by central bank digital currencies and is a big threat to the dollar. Russia has been proposing a system to bypass all the sanctions and to promote bilateral trade. Putin wants to de-dollarize the world and the mBridge platform is the perfect conduit to make this happen. So when Russia identified the underlying technology behind mBridge, the BIS, they just freaked out and they are on the brink of closing it down. mBridge is a very important network for the BRICS countries. It's led by China and the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS. And the main idea is to create a platform powered by blockchain technology. A black box where central banks within the bloc can settle trade with each other without oversight. Countries like China, the UAE, Thailand, and even Saudi Arabia can transact with each other without going through SWIFT. And if you're the West, you obviously hate this platform. It would mean giving up visibility over transactions in the global south. You have no idea, literally no idea who's buying or who's selling what. Furthermore, because there isn't the need to use the dollar or SWIFT, sanctions suddenly don't work. There isn't any way to block trade if it's happening outside your network and being settled outside your currency. Now, remember what Senator Rubio said a year back.
Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
The dollar is not just a currency, it's a tool of control. Punishments are only effective if the world doesn't break away from the system. Over 50% of global trade is settled in dollars, and this is what makes the US sanctions just so effective, and why so many countries are afraid. If your dollar reserve suddenly gets frozen, you could have a currency crisis. Now, the head of the BIS hinted their involvement is limited to countries that follow US rules. It foreshadows a shutdown of the BRICS and mBridge system. We cannot directly support any project for the BRICS. We cannot operate with countries that are subject to sanctions. And in this case, he's referring to the G7 financial sanctions, and the country in question is, of course, Russia. Realize that Moscow wasn't even a part of the mBridge system. However, the central banks involved are either part of BRICS or they align with them. The Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, and the Bank of Thailand and the BBOC, they are the original participants. Saudi Arabia joined later, but Russia isn't in sight. The West, they are afraid of unrestricted trade between the global south and Russia. If BRICS can settle payments outside the Western network without using the dollar or the euro, it will be unthinkable. It will undermine Western financial hegemony. During the summit in Kazan, Putin pitched the idea of a BRICS bridge, and the technology would be based loosely on mBridge. The creation of a black box is freaking the West out. Because of digital technology, trade can be done in an instant. The Thai central bank says mBridge can reduce cross-border transfer times from 5 days to just several seconds. You don't need a US intermediary bank to approve the transactions, so things will move much faster. And just between the four participants, you have $500 billion worth of trade going on. Now you extend this to an entire of BRICS, and you have trillions in trade that can be de-dollarized. The majority of global transactions would be unblockable. Now Russia is just the excuse. Let's look deeper and understand the underlying threat the West is seeing. There's a bigger economic war going on between the US and China. Washington is going to pull on every single lever to prevent mBridge from going live. And if they have to arm twist the BIS, they will do whatever it takes. China is the big boogeyman for Washington. Lawmakers and even presidents, they can't go a day without mentioning how to contain Beijing. Despite the trade war with the US, China's exports to the world continues to grow bigger and bigger. In 2022, China had a trade surplus of nearly $860 billion. They exported 3.5 trillion worth of goods and they imported around 2.7 trillion. So you have over $6 trillion worth of trade flow that can be de-dollarized. The mBridge system will help Chinese trade become unblockable. It also helps trading partners ditch the dollar and use the Chinese RMB instead. That is a nightmare situation for the West because Chinese industries, they are not going to collapse. Their trade is growing, especially electric vehicles and semiconductors. The main agenda is to lock China and BRICS within the entire G7 financial system to make Beijing beholden to the West. It's really important we understand the second order effects of de-dollarization. Sure, sanction-proofing yourself from the US is a great motivator, but the more trade gets done in bilateral currencies, it also hammers away on the US bond market. When you transact less in dollars, there's a corresponding drop in the need to hold US treasuries, and this isn't good when the US continues to borrow more and more money. In this quarter, from October to December, Janet Yellen is expected to borrow nearly $550 billion. Over half a trillion in bonds will be issued to run the US economy. And this amount will continue to grow no matter who gets into office. And let's really be real here. Whether it's Harris or whether it's Donald Trump, the US deficit is going to grow much higher in the years to come. China de-dollarizing the world throws a spanner into the global bond markets. It forces the US to keep yields higher, pushing the US Treasury closer and closer towards a default. Now, many G7 countries, they have their wealth tied up in US Treasuries. Japan has over 1.1 trillion. The UK had 740 billion. Canada has nearly 370 billion as well. Over 12 months, their holdings of US bonds have been increasing. China, on the other hand, is actively dumping theirs. So there's a vested interest in the West to ensure the survival of the US bond market. Because if a default happens and the Federal Reserve, they are forced to print money, the real value of their holdings will collapse. And that's why the mBridge system is just so dangerous. It gives BRICS a platform to ditch dollar transactions. And if trade between members can be done using local currencies, it reduces the need to store any surplus in US bonds. We have to understand this. But here's the trillion-dollar question. Is it too late for the BIS to stop de-dollarization? Will shutting down mBridge really make a difference? The answer is quite simple. It won't matter. And it will be the final blow to the dollar architecture. Trust will simply collapse and fear will fly all the way to the moon. Consider two big events that happened in the world of payment systems. Earlier in May, Hong Kong officially launched the digital RMB payments pilot, the first to take place outside of mainland China. So people in Hong Kong can now open digital RMB wallets with major Chinese banks. Using the system, they can pay merchants in China directly. And this is just on the retail side, but it's a very important step to bypass Western banks using blockchain technology. And it's only a matter of time before other BRICS countries use this system. Chinese banks, they have a global footprint, so someone in Saudi Arabia or Brazil can eventually use the RMB platform to buy stuff directly from China. And it's not just retail. Major banks, they realize they need to do business with China and the BRICS. And if the West sanctions Beijing banks, they still want to earn their billions. HSBC, a UK banking giant, has joined China's Interbank RMB Payment Systems or SIPS. It's China's version of SWIFT and is completely outside of US control or oversight. If China gets kicked out of the dollar system tomorrow, life will continue. We can expect more commercial banks across BRICS and even the Western world to join this alternative. So the threat of the BIS shutting mBridge down is quite hollow, it's quite shallow. The cat is out of the bag, the genie is out of the bottle, and there's simply no way to stop de-dollarization. In fact, I would argue that this just drives countries around the world to ditch the dollar even faster. The US is overreaching once again, it's very, very desperate, and it's not a good look to say the least. And we just need to look at global gold demand. Despite prices hitting all-time highs, demand has grown by 5% in Q3, and that's a new historic record. Over $100 billion have flown into gold just in this quarter. On one hand, you have exploding deficits and a national debt that's unsustainable, and now you have the global south looking to dump the dollar. mBridge shutting down is going to force central banks to really rethink their holdings. If the global south creates its own system, or if they jump into China's platform, obviously local currencies will be used. I better diversify away from US treasuries. Just remember what Alan Greenspan said about US debt. It's really an eye opener. The US probably won't do a classic default, but the alternative is just as insane.
Are U.S. Treasury bonds still safe to invest in?
Very much so. I think this is not an issue of credit rating. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
It's not a surprise that countries are moving away. If you're a gold investor, you want the BIS to shut mBridge down. This will light a fire under BRICS to develop their own payment system. And what will this do? This will cause them to ditch the dollar even faster. Necessity is the mother of invention. Now, I like to look at trends because they tell us what people are doing and where the money is flowing. Since the war started in 2022, gold demand has erupted for central banks, from 500 tons a year to well over 1,000 tons annually. This is despite prices rising by over 50% in 2 years. You can't really argue the data here. The world is losing trust in dollar assets. The value will either be eroded away or get confiscated if the system turns on you. So shutting down mBridge would be a horrible mistake for the West. The US will be launching another torpedo against the dollar and the bond market itself. The BRICS summit tells us how coordinated members are working to secure their national trade. The addition of the BRICS partners tells us more countries are interested in an alternative. Destroying the mBridge system is the best advertisement for multipolar world. But let me know what you think. Will the West really shut down the mBridge platform? And how will this backfire? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.